Hey everyone, welcome back to the American Justice Podcast Q&A video for episode 5. We hope everyone is staying home, staying safe, staying healthy. I know we're trying our best to do it. I just got back from the grocery store and took a rather lengthy shower to wash the Rona funk off of me. Scott, how's everything going on your side of town?
Well, I'm trying to keep the Rona funk off as well. But I have to do that every time I come home from the hospital.
Yeah. I mean, if I go to the grocery store or even out for a walk, I mean, you can't be too careful right now. So, just do what you got to do to survive, man. But you know what I miss more than anything though right now, just being stuck at home. What I miss more than anything is music. Now I have Spotify Premium and tons of CDs from way back in the, remember CDs? Does everybody remember CDs? I can listen to music all day long. I miss live music. I really do. One of my favorite local bands is actually a group of teenagers that are probably better than any other local band I've heard around here, and they're actually from the Royce City, Rockwall Heath area. And they're called 3 Blocks Away. I'm gonna give them a quick shout out. I'm wearing one of their T-shirts right now. If the Rona ever ends and you live in this area, check them out. But you can also check them out on Spotify and SoundCloud as well. I'm sure they would appreciate the attention right about now. So anything you want to get off your chest before we start these questions?
No, I was going to say I've heard them as well, and I will have to say that I will second your accolades, and I think they're fantastic as well.
I miss live music, and that's the first thing that I plan on doing when this is all said and done.
I think that's kind of what everybody is thinking is like, I just can't wait to be able to just go out and enjoy a concert or go out and to the grocery store without having to worry about getting sick and that type of thing. But we'll get through it. We're resilient people. But as long as everybody just kind of does their part to quarantine in place and stay safe and do all the stuff that you're supposed to be doing, we should hopefully get through it all right.
Yep, got my fingers crossed. So let's jump right in here and get to some questions here. We have 4 of them today. Number 1. Are you guys wearing pants? I'm kidding. That's not a question. But the answer is no, we're not. Okay, our first question for episode 5 comes from Debbie in Plano, Texas, right around the corner.
What's up, Debbie?
Okay, number 1. Aren't Charla's claims that her father abused her providing a motive for her guilt? Why didn't they ask questions relating to her whereabouts and such? Or is that coming later? The sound quality of the interview was clear enough to hear all the crazy. I understand everything that was said. I don't think I can say the same of Investigator Collins.
Yeah.
Okay, Debbie.
Thank you for the question, Debbie. Let me actually say that big shout out to Debbie. She's actually a friend of mine. And I'm glad that she got on and asked a question, which means that, by the way, that we should remind people that just because you're friends of us, either one of us, doesn't mean that you can't get on to YouTube or send us an email or a voicemail or anything and ask a question. I think Debbie actually put her question on Facebook. So
we're not gonna hold it against you if you're one of our friends.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people that I talk to, and it's funny because I'll be sitting there talking to someone about the case, and I'll say something, we'll talk about it, and they'll ask me a question. I'm like, well, why don't you get on to Facebook and ask the question, and we'll answer it on the Q&A for everybody.
Yeah.
That way I don't just sit there and answer it for you.
I've had a couple of those myself. They'll start asking me questions about the case, and I'm like, why are you asking me for? Just call the number, send the email.
That's right. Call the number, and Scott will answer it for you. But to answer Debbie's question, it's actually a really good question because you would think that Ranger Collins would automatically ask everybody involved in the case, even the aunts or even the grandmother, where were you that night? What were you doing that night? And Do you have an alibi? Do you have somebody that we can talk to that can provide your whereabouts? Charla actually does talk a little bit about where she was that night, just inherently in the conversation, because part of the establishing when Dennis and Norma were last alive was that phone call that Charla made at 11 o'clock at night that made the investigators think, okay, well, if they didn't answer this phone call, then they had to have been dead by then. If I was dead every time I didn't answer a phone call, then I'd be dead a lot. So,
right?
So, it makes sense that, okay, they didn't answer this call that Norma was expecting at 11 p.m., but, who knows? They could have been asleep. They could have fallen asleep or whatever, and then somebody showed up at 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning, and that's when everything went down. So they helped use that as, the time, they had to have been dead before this time. So in talking about all of that, Charla just kind of naturally talked about where she was. She was over at her grandmother's house, and then she went back to her dorm room, and then she made this call at 11 o'clock. Her parents didn't answer, and, that was pretty much it. But, of course, Ranger Collins didn't go into, well, okay, you made the call at 11, and then what happened? Did you go straight to bed? Did you, go to the store? Did you leave for any reasons? Like, what about the rest of the night? Where were you? And so he didn't ask those questions at all. I would have thought that a trained investigator would have asked those questions, not just of Charla, but Aunt Linda and Aunt Kathy and all of those people. So, but it just never came up. And what was the second part of the question?
Oh, let's see. This is something that's coming later, and then everything else is pretty much.
Oh, does that help establish? Yeah.
That was pretty established. But something that just crossed my mind, and I don't think this has ever crossed my mind before regarding this, is that it was common knowledge that she was currently pursuing a criminal justice degree at a university in Arkansas. Do you think maybe that had anything to do with how light they went on her, because she was about to be one of them, so to speak? And this is my question.
Well, this is not actually, this is not a bad question. It's actually I'm sure you'll be glad to hear that's not a bad question. Thank you for asking not a bad question, Chad.
Yeah, just crossed my mind just now.
But this actually came up as well in Kathy's interview. So Kathy was telling, it was actually investigator Granfield, Tommy Granfield, that she was talking to, but they were asking about, the kids, and she said, oh, well, Charla's a criminal justice major. And you could just see investigator Granfield was like, oh, that's cool. How's she enjoying it? Is she liking it? Is it, like, what's her plans afterwards? Is she going to be a detective? Is she looking to go, So yeah, right. You can definitely tell that kind of established kinship was there, and what bias that had, or what change that had in the investigation or the interview, I'm not really sure. But that happens with me as well, or anybody that's in the same industry. Somebody will ask me what I do for a living, and I'll say I'm an EMT, and they'll say, oh, I'm a doctor, or I'm a nurse, or I'm a paramedic, or whatever, and that kind of does help establish, oh, well, that's cool. Like you kind of understand me then. You understand where I'm going or where I'm coming from. So I can imagine that, when she says that I'm a criminal justice major, I can imagine that would help establish a kinship. I think, unfortunately, if it did have any play in the investigation here, it definitely made them feel like she was somebody that they shouldn't look at closer. So yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a question that only Ranger Collins can answer. Sure would be nice if Ranger Collins would contact us and come on the show, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, Ranger Collins, stick around, watch the rest of the episode, and I will give you that phone number to do so.
We're waiting for we're literally waiting by the phone for your call.
Yes. Okay, let's see. Question. First of all, thank you, Debbie from Plano.
Thank you, Debbie.
We hope you enjoyed your answer. Here is question number 2, and this is a good one. And this is going to be a two-parter because I'm sure you'll have your answer and then I'll have mine. Number 2, if the real killer is out there, do you guys ever fear for your safety? No one's personal information is secret anymore in the age of information. That's Barney from Shreveport, Louisiana.
Shreveport, Oh, I love Shreveport. Maybe we should.
Yeah, it's a good town, man. A lot of fun.
I used to go to Shreveport a lot. I haven't been in a long time, unfortunately, but we used to go a lot.
It is a little stinky from time to time. I've called it Shreveport before.
Well, I think if I'm not mistaken, it's right on the river, right? So
yeah, it is.
Yeah, the I don't know which river it is, Mississippi or something, but
Stinky River.
It can't be as bad as the Trinity River. Anyways,
no.
Back to the question. So, it's one of those things where let's think about it this way. If the real killer is somebody that we're discussing in the podcast, let's say that it's Mike or Joe or Aunt Kathy or Charla or whoever, because those are the people that we've talked about so far. But if it is one of them, right? I think that the stupidest thing that they could do would be to try anything with, me or you or Edie or, Becky and Lee or anybody that's in the documentary, anybody that's involved in the podcast, anybody that's involved with trying to get the story out there. The stupidest thing they could do would be to try something with us because, if anything happens to any one of us, who's the first person they're going to look at? Oh, well, these are the people that they're talking about. So I don't really fear in that way. I will say, though, that I am mindful of it. I take my safety very, very seriously, and I do have a means to defend myself if anything ever does happen. But again, I think it would be very stupid of anybody involved to try anything. Now, let's just say, for example, that it's not anybody that we're talking about. Let's say it's not Mike or Joe or Charla or Aunt Kathy. I'm watching you, Aunt Kathy. Let's say it's not one of any of those people. Let's just say that it's the guy that was doing the offense, or if it was somebody that was totally unrelated. Let's say it was the drug dealer down the street. You would think that they're happy that we're talking about other people. So definitely don't worry about those guys if it's not anybody. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it's one thing to be mindful of it, and it's also, but it's also not, consuming my life or anything like that.
Right. And I know a couple of the family members have reached out to me and, gave a little praise for, what I'm doing on the writing side of things. And they've also told me to watch my back. And I don't know if it's something that they've heard from someone in the family or just someone they suspect. But, I mean, I spent 4 years in the Army. I spent a couple of years studying Uechi-ryu karate. I spent several years with the Sheriff's Department. I've spent the majority of my life looking over my shoulder and fighting whatever it is that was there. So, bring it. Bring it.
I mean, that's pretty much all you could do. Any of us at any point could be, the victim of violent crime, just like obviously, Dennis and Norma had no idea what was coming, what was lurking in the shadows. And, so it's unfortunate, but, it could happen to any of us. But I think we're okay because, like I said, from the reasons that I gave, but, we'll see what happens.
All right. And like you said, I mean, this is Texas. I'm armed too, it's, and we're under a state of emergency right now. So I don't have to have my LTC. Most of the time I have a Ruger on my hip. So, whatever. All right. We're going to take a quick break and we'll get back to the last two questions. Hang in there.
Sounds good.
C. Derick Miller is an author, producer, and gonzo journalist from the conservative community of Greenville, Texas. Sam Cloud Miller is a graphic artist and a liberal civil rights activist from Austin, Texas. Combine those two and what do you have? Magic. recorded in the Bishop Arts District of Dallas. It's a podcast that is sure to never disappoint. They talk about books, film, music, today's topics, and life in general. Even though they may disagree on the topics from time to time, they'll always kiss and make up. It's a practice that America needs to relearn, don't you think? No filters, no scripts, and no schedule. Catch the Butterflies Make Me Angry podcast on Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube. Peace to the peaceful, truth to the masses, hell to the tyrants. Get all the details at cderickmiller.com.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Q&A episode for episode 5 of the American Justice Podcast. We hope everyone's doing fine and hanging in there. We're going to jump right into question number 3. This question comes from Cheryl in Concord, New Hampshire. That's a beautiful place, by the way.
Oh, never been.
Love New England, man, especially in the fall. It's so gorgeous.
I would love to.
Okay, here we go. Charla's interview sounded less like it was part of a murder investigation and more like a first date get-to-know-you session. Do you think the cops were kind of skirting the issue a bit?
I think that, I would imagine that part of any interview would be, to get to know the person that you're talking to. So because you're going to want to build that rapport, because, if there are hard questions later on, you want them to be kind of, you want them to like you. You want them to have that rapport with you. So when you do get to the point of you're asking hard questions, you want that to be coming from the standpoint of somebody that they like and possibly respect or whatever. So I can see why Ranger Collins would spend some time asking some innocuous questions, like where did you grow up? How's your relationship with your parents? Stuff like that. But the problem that I've noticed, and this is, again, just my opinion, and anybody could write in or call in or whatever if you disagree, but it seems like every single question seems to come back to her. We're at the point where, okay, we need to learn a little bit about you and your parents and your relationship and all that stuff, but we also need to move on and talk about, who had a motivation to kill your parents. And we'll get to it next week. She does eventually come around to, an hour into the interview. They do start talking about, certain people and whatever. But yeah, I agree. It does seem like, at least up to this point, that it's just like, come on, okay, we understand that that you had some issues. We understand that your dad beat you, or he didn't beat you, or he put his hands on you, or he didn't put his hands on you. I don't really know at this point because she keeps going back and forth. But you know what I mean? Like, I agree with that. And I also want to say one other thing about the fact that, it may seem like we're harping on Charla. But again, that's only because that's where we're at in the interview. Next week, we'll start... Right. We'll finish her interview, and then we'll start with Brandon's. And then it's going to seem like, oh, well, we're harping on Brandon because that's all we're talking about. But you just have to bear with us until we get through these interviews. We have Charla's interview, we have Mike's interview, we have Brandon's interview. We've got all these interviews that happen kind of all together, right? Once we get through these interviews, once we get through the investigative part of this story, and we get on past that, then it'll go fairly quickly, because what's going to happen is when we start talking about the trial, I'm going to reference, something that Charla said in her interview or something that Brandon said in his interview.
I mean, people need to know this.
If you don't know it, then it's going to just come out of left field. So that's all we're doing at this point, is just kind of giving you the backstory and that kind of thing. So once we get past it, it'll go a lot faster. We'll get more into the trial. We'll get into the investigation. We'll get into the sword and the knife and the gun and, all that stuff, all the quote unquote interesting stuff. But you really need to know the backstory before we get into that stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, if she is listening, and I'm sure she is, she's wondering why these
Hi,
two guys
Charla.
if she's wondering why these two guys are making it all about her, Well, this episode is about your interview, and you made the interview all about yourself. So you did this to you.
Right. And that's something that's kind of funny. I was actually thinking about this when I was driving down the road earlier. I was thinking to myself, like, I can see how people would say, okay, well, you're just trying to, make Charla look bad or whatever. And you're exactly right. What you said before is, if you don't like your truth, change your truth.
Exactly.
And, the thing is, it's like, all we're doing is showing what she said and what she did. Now, yes, I do kind of insert my personal opinion every once in a while. But I don't think I don't think it's my personal opinion that's getting everybody, kind of up in a roar. I think it's the stuff that she's saying. Like, who cares what I say? I'm just it's just some guy that's just sitting there making a podcast. Who cares what I say? I'm not important.
There's not a single journalist or host out there who doesn't insert their personal opinion into their work. And the only way to prevent that is stay out of the news.
Exactly. Yeah. So if some guy, goes and robs a liquor store and then they catch him, and then the news goes over there and says, hey, look at this guy on videotape that robbed a liquor store. Why would you get mad at the reporter for saying that the guy robbed the liquor store? You know what I mean? So, but anyways, yeah. So if you don't like the way that you're coming across in the way that we're showing talking about these clips, maybe you should have been a little more forthcoming about who you thought. You know what I mean? Like.
That's true.
You're exactly right. If you don't like the way that you're coming across, then maybe you shouldn't have come across that way.
Or you come on this show and speak your piece, because it's not too late to come across differently.
That's
nudge,
true.
nudge, hint, hint, wink, wink. Say no more. Say no more.
And it's absolutely, it's a valid point, because if something has changed and you want to come on and say, you know what, I really was kind of I was really going through a bad time. My parents just died, and I was really kind of just worried about my life and what I was going to do and blah, 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 and all that stuff. Then that's fantastic. Come on, let's, you can sit right here beside, once the corona's over, you can sit right here beside me. You can talk right to the camera, just like I'm doing, and, say your piece. Absolutely. We will not edit it. We will not, try to make you look in a certain way. We will absolutely let you say whatever you want to say.
I'll even cook dinner.
And that's nothing to sneeze
too.
at. I've eaten some of the food that he's cooked, so that's a good invitation right there.
All right, let's see. I don't know. I have headphones on. I can't hear the outside very well. If you guys are picking up on little voices, don't worry. My house isn't haunted. It's my 5-year-old and my wife downstairs doing a jigsaw puzzle. So, okay, let's go to question 4 here. Did Charla have an alibi for the night of the murders other than her phone records? Cell phones can always be left at home. And that comes from Jonathan in Enid, Oklahoma.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate the question. So it kind of depends on how you qualify or how you define alibi, right? She did say that she was at home. She did have some roommates, which, interestingly enough, Ranger Collins didn't even talk to until I think it was 8 or 12 months later. She finally, after they had all moved out, and she didn't even live with them anymore. And finally, a year later, he goes back and says, "Hey, was Charla there home that night?" And of course, they were like, "Well, to the best of my recollection, yeah, it was a year ago." So you would have thought that again that he would check up on everybody's alibi and that type of thing. But it's hard to check up on when somebody says I was at home all night, except for their phone records. And you're right, if their phone's sitting on the nightstand and they leave, then there's really going to be no way to find out they left, other than if there's somebody that says, "Yeah, I was sleeping, and I woke up and Charla was walking out the door, and it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. That's the only way that you would ever know. If she snuck out the door real quick and real quietly, then you would never know. But again, I think the biggest takeaway from that is Ranger Collins just didn't check. And, of course, Brandon is sitting in jail for a year before Ranger Collins even goes and thinks about talking to her alibi. So, I don't think he was actually going back to check her alibi. I think he was just doing some more kind of background stuff.
All right. Well, that's all the questions we have for this week. Make sure you check us out at AmericanJusticePodcast.com. If you want to submit a question for next week's episode, which will premiere on Sunday, episode 6.
Episode
right?
6.
Return of the Jedi. I have to put them in Star Wars terms to remember them.
George Lucas isn't going to be mad, is he? Well, I guess he doesn't own it anymore. Disney's not going to be mad, are they?
Nah. Disney's closed. Disney is closed right now. So they can get mad all they want.
Right.
But if you want to submit a question for next week's episode, you can reach out to us in many ways. First of all, by telephone. The number is 972-942-0444. Make sure you state clearly in the recording that we are allowed to use your voice in this show. Otherwise, we can't use it. You can also contact us on Facebook at facebook.com/American Justice Podcast, on Twitter at twitter.com/AJusticePodcast, and email info@AmericanJusticePodcast.com. You can also find out more information about this case at... Whoa, my eyes just suddenly not used to all this sunlight out there. You can find out more about the Brandon Woodruff case and the documentary that we're currently working on at freebrandon.org.
This would be a good place to... I do want to give a shout out to somebody. My editor, Chris Brunning, he is absolutely, positively one of my favorite people on earth. He is helping with this documentary. I won't say free, but I will say he is definitely not being compensated for the time that he's putting into it. He's worth his weight in gold, and I appreciate all the work that he's putting into it. I'm really, really looking forward to everybody seeing the end result of what we're doing. We have a lot of big things planned for this documentary. We're moving it from kind of a 1.5 to 2 hour single episode documentary, which is kind of what he signed up for. We're moving it to more of a 6 or 7 episode, kind of a Netflix type documentary. And he's staying on board. He believes in Brandon's innocence. He believes in the case. He believes in what we're doing with the documentary. So Chris Brunning, you are a hero among men, and I really appreciate everything that you are doing.
Awesome. All right. That's all I have for this week. I'm looking forward to the next episode on Sunday. I feel like I wrote it so long ago. I have no idea what I said. So I'm just as curious as everyone else who listens to this podcast. So everyone, make sure you're taking care of yourself. Make sure that you're staying healthy to the best of your abilities. Staying socially isolated. We're gonna get through this.
Yes, we will.
We will get through this, and I will buy everyone a beer. One beer. You all have to share it.
Everybody, beer over at Chad's house.
Yes, beer at my house. Everyone gets one, and you can watch me drink the others. All right, well, let's end it with the tagline, Scott, on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Stay aware.
Stay
strong.
Stay strong.
And get
involved. You guys be safe.
Bye, guys. See you later.
The American Justice Podcast is owned and copyrighted by Atua Productions, LLC. Your host is Scott Poggensee, and your writer is C. Derick Miller. The theme music for the American Justice Podcast has been created and composed by Josh DeRosa. Scripted and recorded episodes are published every Sunday morning, with follow-up Q&A episodes released on Fridays. Atua Productions aims for this to be an interactive podcast, where you, the audience, has a great amount of influence on the content of our shows. You can interact with us in several ways. First, and most preferred, is you can leave us a voicemail. Our phone number is 972-942-0444. Be sure to leave your name and the city you're calling from, along with whether or not we can use your voice on the air. If Facebook is more your style, you can log on to our Facebook page at facebook.com/American Justice Podcast. Feel free to leave a comment, or you can message us on Messenger if you have a more pressing question or issue. If you would like to blog about the show, then you can log on to AmericanJusticePodcast.com and tell us what you think there. You can find many of the documents discussed in this episode there as well. If you are a tweeter, you can also voice your opinion on Twitter at AJusticePodcast. If you would like to support the show, you can do so in a couple different ways. First, consider visiting our Patreon page at patreon.com/AJPodcast. We have different levels of support that include t-shirts, guest call-in spots, and early access to our podcast and YouTube shows. Next, you can like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to get notifications of when we publish episodes. We would also very much appreciate it if you could give us a 5-star review. If you have any comments about the show, or more importantly, any tips on the case we're discussing, please call 972-942-0444 and leave us a message. After all, if the subject of our podcast is innocent, that means someone out there is guilty. American Justice Army? Let's find them.